Hey everyone, welcome back to your nerdy show. I'm your host, Spoiler Master, and today we are diving into one of the most intense, brutal, and emotionally devastating biblical dramas on TV right now. House of David, Season 2. Didn't just raise the stakes, it rewrote the entire power structure of Israel, shattered families, exposed betrayals, unleashed prophecies, and set the stage for the downfall of Saul's dynasty. From the moment David lifts Goliath's sword over the valley of Elah, to the heartbreaking wedding that explodes into violence, to Samuel's final supernatural stand, Eshbaal's true betrayal, and Saul's complete moral collapse, this season took us through 8 episodes of warfare, prophecy, political deception, forbidden love, and destiny colliding head-on with insanity. So in this video, we're breaking down every episode from 1 to 8, covering every major twist, the battles, the betrayals, the romances, the prophecies, the shocking deaths, and the moment David officially becomes a hunted man. This is your full, detailed, epic recap of House of David Season 2, the rise of the true king, the fall of Saul's house, and the darkness that's about to engulf Israel. Let's get into it.
Jonathan! Protect the prince!
House of David, Season 2, Episode 2. Episode 2 opens in the aftermath of David killing Goliath. The Israelites explode in triumph as David lifts Goliath's sword and decapitates the giant. Mychal narrates the legendary significance of the blade. Jonathan rallies the Israelite troops, launching a brutal full-scale battle against the Philistines, while Samuel watches from a nearby hilltop, praying for the nation's victory. Saul prepares to join the fight, despite being mentally unstable and haunted by visions of King Agag's spirit. Mychal and Mirab try to restrain him, but he charges forward anyway. Jonathan notices the Philistine king, Achish, targeting David. In a flashback, we learn Achish seeks revenge for Jonathan and Saul killing his father years ago. Jonathan saves David by shooting Achish with an arrow, but Achish presses forward until Saul storms onto the battlefield with horsemen. Meanwhile, David's brothers search desperately for him, knowing he is inexperienced in war. At camp, Philistines attack, forcing Mychal and Mirab to defend themselves. Saul becomes disoriented by Agag's spirit and wanders from the battle. Jonathan tries to reach him, with David pleading to help, but Jonathan refuses. Mychal kills 2 soldiers in self-defense. Achish sends assassins to kill Samuel, but the old prophet fights them off and continues praying. Saul eventually believes he has destroyed Agag's spirit, but Achish appears seeking vengeance. During a violent duel, Saul's sword is shattered by Goliath's blade, and Jonathan intervenes just in time. Suddenly, a mysterious giant arrives, tossing Jonathan aside and seizing Achish. David rescues Jonathan from the creature. Israel ultimately gains the advantage, slaying one of the Philistine kings and pursuing the enemy to Gath. Amid the celebration, Eliab mourns Nathaniel, who dies delivering a message for David. Saul publicly declares David his champion, gifts him a robe, and promises him marriage into the royal family. Jonathan gives David his own sword. Meanwhile, Doeg finds Goliath's sword and secretly hands it to Abner. When Saul boasts to Samuel about winning without God, Samuel refuses to re-anoint him, so Saul has him arrested, unaware that his downfall has only begun.
For all of Israel!
Episode 2 opens with Mychal narrating the eventual fall of Saul's house, blaming it on the betrayal of the man she loved. The story jumps 1 year after David killed Goliath, to a moment where Abner summons David to calm Saul's worsening torment. Saul confronts David in private, accusing him of betrayal and asking whether Samuel chose him as the next king. David answers that it was God, not Samuel, who made that choice, sending Saul into a violent rage, prompting him to hurl his spear at David. Back at the palace, Mirab joyfully welcomes Eshbal home, but senses a dark change in him. David receives news of Nathaniel's death and goes to Judah to mourn with his family. Eliab confesses the emotional toll of losing soldiers and shares Nathaniel's final message, that he was proud of David. David attempts to explain his conflict with Saul, but is interrupted when soldiers arrive to announce David's appointment as Eliab's commander. Shocked, Eliab fights David to prove he is unprepared to lead, fearing his men will die under David's inexperience. Meanwhile, Jonathan struggles with injuries from battle and is secretly taken to a healer, where he meets Sarah, who saves his life. Eshbal notices Jonathan's affection for her and offers Sarah a position in the palace, which she rejects. Elsewhere, Achish and Prince Daganor of Ashdod discuss new iron forging technology, marking a shift from bronze weapons to iron. Back in Gibeah, Ahinoam visits Samuel in prison and pleads with him to change God's decree against Saul, but Samuel refuses. Later, Ahinoam suggests delaying David's marriage to Mychal, while Mirab proposes an alternative plan to Saul. When Doeg tortures Samuel for the name of the Anointed One, Samuel curses him, causing Doeg to be tormented and allowing the prophet to escape. Saul sends men to recapture him, while Abner secretly hides Goliath's sword with the priests of Nob. After David returns from the funeral, Mychal expects Saul to announce their wedding. Instead, Saul shockingly declares that David will marry Mirab, shattering both David and Mychal's hopes. House of David, Season 2, Episode 3. Episode 3 opens with Eshbal recounting his year in exile to Saul. After being captured and tortured, his captors tried to force him to renounce Saul and his faith. Eshbal resisted for months, until pretending to break, only to kill his captors and free the other prisoners. He claims he is changed, and proves it by confessing his secret coronation and offering to marry Dinah, the woman he was accused of defiling. Saul already knew the truth, but waited for his wife or son to confess. Meanwhile, David and Mychal are devastated by Saul's announcement that David will marry Mirab. David still hopes to reason with Saul, but the king angrily rejects him, insisting a shepherd has no right to question a king. Abner warns David to be cautious. Jonathan asks Saul not to harm Samuel, while Abner insists scouts will find the prophet before the Day of Atonement. Jonathan spends the following days training David, trying to shape him into a stronger fighter and future leader. Achish, driven by vengeance, also trains relentlessly in Philistia. Meanwhile, Ahinoam grows anxious that the Anointed One will soon take her husband's throne. Saul then orders Jonathan and David to escort Eshbal to Dan to negotiate with Yahir for permission to marry Dinah. Saul instructs Jonathan to let David lead as practice. Ahinoam quietly sends Bashai away to hide her secrets, but Joab kills Bashai after overhearing her conversation with Abner. Keziah begins spying despite warnings, and soon overhears Ahinoam's involvement with witchcraft. In Dan, the soldiers join a wild boar hunt where they meet Dinah, whose father mistreats her for being a daughter instead of a son. David diplomatically persuades Yahir to accept Saul's offer. Eshbal privately convinces Dinah to marry him to escape her home. However, on the journey back, Yahir is ambushed and killed. David again saves Jonathan, though Eliab remains skeptical of David's leadership, possibly out of jealousy. Back in Gibeah, Ahinoam banishes Ahinoam for practicing witchcraft and elevates Keziah. Jonathan reunites with Sarah, who has now accepted Eshbal's offer to work at the palace. David begs Saul for more time before marrying Mirab or Mychal. Dinah reveals she was never defiled by Eshbal, but he chooses to marry her anyway, drawn to her strength. Jonathan and Sarah begin a budding romance. The episode ends with Adriel seeking Saul and revealing he knows the identity of the Anointed One in order to save himself.
People, I am God's chosen king.
House of David, Season 2, Episode 4. Episode 4 opens with David playing his harp, lost in memories of being excluded from the Day of Atonement as a child. Mychal urges him to embrace the celebrations now that he is the king's honored guest, but Mirab secretly resents how strongly he still loves her sister. Meanwhile, Saul secretly sends Joab to kill the supposed anointed boy in Judah, shaking Abner's confidence in the king. Eliab is eager to accompany David to the tabernacle, but is instead assigned to Joab's deadly mission. In Gibeah, Mychal schemes to bring Jonathan and Sarah closer, even inviting her on the journey. The group is surprised when Saul announces that Ahinoam will not attend. The 2-day trip becomes a test of leadership for David. Saul stresses the ceremony's importance, while David's soldiers mock him for singing. Jonathan encourages his growth. Mirab attempts to win David by persuading Saul to restore Jesse's honor and sheep, but David rejects any attempt to buy his love. She vows to create purpose for herself regardless. While camping near Geba, The group discovers a Philistine attack. David leads the charge, but many die, and the survivors blame him for rushing into battle. David mourns deeply, and Mirab comforts him while Mychal watches heartbroken. In Judah, Joab reveals their mission is to kill an innocent neighbor family, leaving Eliab conflicted and traumatized. Meanwhile, Philistine leader Dagonor pushes for rapid iron weapon production. At the tabernacle, David receives a warm welcome, and Mirab publicly links herself to David. Saul unsuccessfully seeks Samuel's wife's help in changing Samuel's decision. Samuel later tells Jonathan to guide David. Adriel confesses his lie to David, who is disgusted. Saul claims he killed the Anointed One, but Samuel realizes David is alive. He refuses to re-anoint Saul and leads the ceremony himself, as David openly mourns the fallen soldiers. Jonathan tries comforting him. Afterward, relationships fracture. Mychal accepts defeat. Sarah distances herself from Jonathan, and Eliab grows cold toward David. As the group departs, the soldiers sing David's song, showing his growing influence. House of David, Season 2, Episode 5. Episode 5 opens with David leading his men in another battle, now a far more confident commander who credits his growth to God. The next morning, Jonathan visits the camp and finds David writing poetry. The two share their struggles. David misses Mychal, Jonathan misses Sarah, but their conversation is interrupted by a sudden Philistine ambush. David takes charge, but Eliab disobeys orders again. The Israelites overpower the enemy, discover more suspicious charcoal shipments, and seize Philistine iron weapons. David confronts Eliab afterward, but his brother remains distant. Back in Gibeah, Mychal teaches children and is moved when David returns home to massive praise. The people loudly compare David's victories to Saul's, deepening the king's insecurity. Saul and Ahinoam's marriage has deteriorated, worsened by Saul taking Keziah as a concubine. Mirab eagerly greets David, but he seeks Mychal first. Meanwhile, Jonathan shows Abner the Philistine swords, prompting Abner to investigate Goliath's blade. The signature on it leads to a legendary Endor smith known as the God of Swords. Abner insists on traveling to Endor despite his fraught past there. David confides in Jonathan that being anointed frightens him. Mychal pushes him away again, insisting she won't stand between him and Mirab. Mirab pressures David into agreeing to a wedding date. David, Jonathan, Abner, and select soldiers disguise themselves as merchants and journey to Endor. Tensions rise among David's brothers, especially Eliab. In Gibeah, Mychal mourns losing David, confesses her love to Joab, and makes him promise to protect David. Ahinoam advises Mirab to harden her heart. Keziah frees herself from Doeg's control. In Endor, Abner recruits the master swordsmith, promising to rescue his enslaved daughter. But before they leave, Abner's mother, the witch of Endor, kidnaps the group. She exposes their deepest secrets, including Eliab's guilt and Jonathan's tragic future. She senses divine protection around David and curses Abner, prophesizing Saul's downfall. Shaken, the soldiers keep the ordeal secret. David later urges Jonathan to seek happiness, inspiring him to return to Sarah. Meanwhile, the Philistines expand their power under Dagonor and Achish. Returning to Gibeah, David finally chooses his own path. He refuses to marry Mirab and tells Saul to do whatever he must. House of David, Season 2, Episode 6. Episode 6 opens with Ahinoam discovering Keziah in Saul's bed. Soon after, Saul and Abner debate how to handle David's defiance. Saul wants retaliation, but Ahinoam proposes a subtler punishment. Give David a deadly mission he won't return from. Saul reluctantly agrees.
Meanwhile, Jonathan lives peacefully in Sarah's village. He proposes, but Sarah refuses. She doesn't want a life as queen. This forces Jonathan to reveal David is the true anointed king and that he will never inherit the throne. Freed from fear, Sarah accepts his proposal. They marry that very day in a small village ceremony. At the palace, Mirab fumes over David rejecting her, but finds comfort knowing her father will punish him. Saul summons David and offers a compromise. If David still wants to marry Mychal, he must prove loyalty by destroying the Philistine forge in Gath and bringing back 100 Philistine foreskins. Saul knows this is nearly suicidal. David accepts, promising not to tell Mychal. Before he leaves, David asks Mychal if she would still marry him. She believes their love is doomed, but admits she would say yes in another world. This encourages David to go. He brings only a handful of elite warriors, deliberately leaving Eliab behind because of his recent reckless behavior. Saul secretly sends Doeg to warn the Philistines, who immediately prepare a deadly trap. Joab witnesses Doeg sending the message and becomes suspicious. Jonathan and Sarah return to Gibeah to a royal banquet, where Mirab spirals into drunken despair, and Kezia creates tension by sitting at the high table. Meanwhile, Joab forces Doeg to confess, prompting Jonathan and the army to rush to save David. In Gath, David and his men are trapped and nearly burned alive. His quick thinking saves them, but David is cornered until Jonathan, Joab, and the Israelite army arrive just in time. In the chaos, Daganor is killed. David returns victorious, delivering the foreskins and announcing the forge's destruction. He demands Saul announce his marriage to Mychal. He accepts his proposal, furious that David survived and is now more powerful than ever. Saul lashes out. He publicly blames Ahinoam and banishes her from the palace, shocking Mirab and Eshbal, who coldly calls it karma.
Did someone choose you?
No.
House of David, Season 2, Episode 7. Episode 7 opens with Mychal reciting Deuteronomy as royal messengers deliver invitations across Israel for her wedding to David. Adriel is stunned to learn David will marry into the royal family. Meanwhile, Eshbal struggles with recurring nightmares from his time in Edom. He awakens to news of burnt silos, an attack everyone assumes was done by Achish's forces. With famine looming, Eshbal volunteers to negotiate grain from the king of Edom, and Saul reluctantly lets him try. Jonathan confronts Saul over Ahinoam's banishment, learning she plotted David's death by sending him on a suicidal mission. Saul insists David has now proven himself worthy of their family. Both Jonathan and Mirab struggle with the fallout of their mother's exile. Sarah also reveals to Jonathan she is pregnant and asks him to stay hidden until David becomes king. Meanwhile, David and Mychal joyfully prepare for their long-awaited wedding. Mirab joins Dinah on a hunt, where Dinah spots the one-eyed Edomite who murdered her father. Secretly meeting with Doeg, she intercepts his messenger bird and reads a suspicious letter. Jesse arrives for the wedding and speaks candidly with Saul, admitting he feels he lost 2 sons to palace politics. Saul offers gifts, but Jesse refuses. Eshbal announces that Edom will send grain, though he hides the king's conditions. In the women's quarters, Mirab and Mychal reconcile. The wedding takes place beautifully, with heartfelt vows and rare joy in the kingdom. Afterwards, Adriel confesses his past deception to David, who rejects him. Seeking advantage, Adriel then tells Eshbal the truth about David's anointing. That night, Eshbal murders Dinah by throwing her from a high wall after she reveals evidence of palace betrayal. Mirab sees everything, and together they convincingly stage it as a suicide, deceiving everyone, including Jonathan. David and Mychal's wedding night is cut short when Saul summons David. Consumed by rage, after learning the truth of David's anointing, Saul demands answers. When David insists that God, not Samuel, chose him, Saul erupts and hurls a spear at him.
House of David, Episodes 8. After David's wedding to Mychal, Episode 7 ends with King Saul learning the truth he feared most, that David is the anointed king chosen by God. Furious at being deceived and terrified of losing his throne, Saul summons David to his chambers unarmed, while he himself dons full royal armor. When Saul attacks, David defends himself with the skill he has gained as a warrior. Saul's physical and mental decline is painfully visible. Eshbal soon joins the fight, but David overpowers both men long enough to escape. David rushes to Mychal and reveals the truth about his anointing, something he had kept secret even from her. Mychal is heartbroken and conflicted. She loves David deeply, but she also feels betrayed by his secrecy and fears he may have contributed to her father's madness. Despite their emotional clash, the couple still loves each other. David urges Mychal to flee with him, but she chooses to stay with her family in their moment of crisis. David escapes Gibeah alone. Saul immediately spreads the lie that David tried to assassinate him and orders Abner to hunt him down. Mychal becomes a target, but Joab, who has long harbored feelings for her, intervenes and protects her. Saul interrogates his daughter, but refuses to believe she didn't know David's secret. Only Mirab saves Mychal by lying that David threatened her. Mychal escapes punishment, but is left emotionally shattered. Jonathan, who returns to the palace for the family feast, secretly meets with David and promises to help him. He confronts Saul publicly, reminding everyone of David's heroism and exposing Saul's past attempts to have David killed. Saul, consumed by paranoia, throws a spear at Jonathan. This moment confirms to Jonathan that Saul cares more for power than for God or family. Jonathan strengthens his alliance with David, revealing Sarah's pregnancy and asking David to protect his future family. He also races out to warn David of Saul's coming attack. David hides in the priestly city of Nob, but Saul's forces track him down. When Abner attempts to seize David, he is stopped by prophet Samuel, who unleashes a devastating supernatural attack. Samuel later confronts Saul directly, forcing him to face the truth. The throne belongs to David. The psychic effort drains Samuel's life, and he dies after ensuring David escapes. Saul presses onward, but most of his soldiers are too psychologically injured to continue. This allows Doeg and his brutal black-robed warriors to step in. Saul does nothing to stop them as they massacre the innocent priests of Nob, something even Abner refuses to do. This marks Saul's complete moral collapse. Meanwhile, David finds loyal allies. His own battle unit secretly deserts Saul to join him. Joab and Eliab also bring soldiers to support David, recognizing him as the rightful king. Back in Gibeah, Eshbal arrives with the king of Edom, the same man who held him captive during his exile. It becomes clear that Eshbal has been sabotaging Israel from within. With the grain silos destroyed and famine looming, he has opened the door for Edom to seize control of Israel through a deceptive diplomatic alliance.
Betray the God who anointed you! No!
Our nerdy thoughts. And that brings us to the end of House of David Season 2. 8 episodes of prophecy fulfilled, secrets exposed, alliances shattered, and a kingdom now standing on the edge of absolute chaos. Saul's paranoia has reached its breaking point. Eshbal has revealed the monster he's been hiding all along. And David, once the shepherd boy with a slingshot, now walks the path of a hunted king chosen by God himself. From here on, nothing will ever be the same for Israel. But the real storm is just beginning. The rise of David, the fall of Saul, and the civil war that will change the fate of an entire nation is now inevitable. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the series, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because we're going to be covering everything from Season 3 theories to character analysis, biblical origins, behind-the-scenes details, and more. This has been your Nerdy Show. I'm your host, Spoiler Master, and as always, stay curious, stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next one.
No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.